Hello, I'm Rory McAvoy. I'm with Philip Morris and we're at the Columbia headquarters of the NAWCC, and we're going to be talking about the clocks by Joseph Ives. And these are part of a very special collection that was donated recently to the museum by George and Kathy Goolsby.
That's correct. George and Kathy are avid collectors of early American clocks. And George focused a lot on Joseph Ives, as many collectors do, because as you'll see, Ives incorporated a lot of really very interesting construction techniques into his clocks. And we'll have a look at some of those today. The earliest clocks produced by Ives were made somewhere around 1808, and he produced these tall clocks up until about 1818. So these are the earliest clocks that Ives produced. And what we have on your side, this is an Ives 8-day tall clock movement. And for comparison, I also have what I'll say is a very standard 30-hour Connecticut movement. So we'll compare and contrast. The movement which is closest to you is a Joseph Ives tall clock movement. And one of the first things that you'll notice is that it doesn't have a typical dial. The dial in this case is a rectangular dial, as opposed to a standard Connecticut clock, which has an arch top dial. And you'll also notice that the dial is reverse glass painted. So these dials are very fragile, and today very few of these dials survive in original condition.
What do you think is the underlying cause of the low survival rate for these?
Well, although Ives was a very clever maker and collectors love to look at his all the very innovative construction techniques he put into his movements, mechanically many of these movements were weak. And what we find is that many of these tall clock movements, when you hang the weights on these clocks, the movements tend to move quite a bit. And it puts a lot of pressure on the reverse glass painted dial within the picture frame, and they tend to crack over time.
Okay, and these weights presumably are around about 12 pounds each?
That's correct. They're about 12 pounds each, so it's very, very heavy.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that collectors love Ives is he introduced a lot of construction techniques that are unique to Ives. One of these, and one of the most widely known, are the roller pinions.
I saw that, and having worked with John Harrison, he used roller pinions in his clocks of the 1720s. I doubt there's any sort of direct transfer of information there. So.
I think these are completely independent of one another. There's no evidence that Ives knew of Harrison's work. But if you look in this movement, the roller pinions essentially were a feature that Ives used to reduce the friction in his movements. As a result of this, Ives was able to add additional wheels to his train, and he was able to achieve 8 days of running time compared to other Connecticut movements where they could only achieve 30 hours of running time.
That's great. I mean, when you run your finger across the roller pinions today, they're absolutely buttery smooth. Really nice to see the woodwork as well. So when you look at the arbors, we've got sort of quite finely turned, very smooth, very close grained wood with little ringing turned into.
Yes, decorative turnings. So Ives followed a very traditional formula, if you will, for producing these movements. The plates are quarter sawn oak, which is a readily available material in Connecticut.
Can you tell me what do you mean when you say quarter sawn?
It is the way that the log is split, and visually these quarter sawn boards have a lot of figuring or different flakes of color in them. But from a practical standpoint, it produced a plate which was dimensionally stable.
So it's less likely to warp.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The wheels are made of cherry, so it wears very well. It also machines very, very easily. And then the arbors were typically made of laurel, and laurel is a smaller tree or bush that grows in Connecticut with very tight concentric circles, and it machines again very, very easily and produces a very strong arbor.
And over time, I mean, it's developed this lovely sheen to it.
A beautiful
deep
patina.
color. Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, these are the earliest of the Ives clocks, and it's very interesting that these roller pinions were wildly successful.
Mm.
So again, we know that they were introduced as early as 1808, and they were used all the way up into the mass-produced shelf clocks in Connecticut, all the way up into the mid-1840s. So they were hugely popular, and they were also used by the 1840s. Of course, these are brass movements.
Philip, we've now got a clock that is also from the Ives output, but it is known, as I'm aware, as a Merriman clock. What's that about?
That's correct. This is a very interesting set of clocks that was manufactured by Joseph Ives, and these are called Merriman Ives clocks. So Merriman actually was the case maker. In 1925, a number of cases were found in the attic in a house in Bristol, Connecticut, and a photograph was made. And it's a photograph of some cases about 30 inches tall. And along with the cases, there were 7 movements, all in various states of disrepair. And this is one of the 7 movements that was found.
I mean, the first thing that I notice when I look at this is it's got a balance, a torsion with a torsion spring.
Yes, which is very unusual in American clocks. This is actually an 8-day tall clock movement produced by Ives, but it's been re-engineered to fit into a small shelf clock. And in this case, he's fitted a torsion balance to the clock. Now, these movements are not signed. They have all of the hallmarks of movements made by Joseph Ives. For example, the center shaft is held in by this clip. That is a feature of Joseph Ives. The count wheel is integral with the great wheel. That's also a feature of Ives. And the gear ratios, the teeth count to the pinion counts, were very peculiar for Ives, and this matches an Ives 8-day tall clock.
So, for example, what might be an unusual combination that's specific to Ives?
This is a 1.5 to 8 gear ratio, and as far as Connecticut makers, Ives was the only clockmaker who used that unusual combination of gear counts.
That's interesting. So you can, by studying the tooth counts on these clocks, you can identify a likelihood, at least, that it might be by Joseph Ives.
That's correct. Now, these clocks, this clock has a reverse glass painted dial. This is a recreation. Mm-hmm. None of the clocks that are known today have the original glass dials.
Same problems as with the tall case clock.
That's
movements.
right.
Yeah.
And we also know that when these movements were found, some of the movements showed evidence of wear. But when the movements were found, the seat boards were 12 inches. Mm-hmm. The Merriman cases are only 10 inches. In the 70s, when these movements were restored, the fellow who restored them...
So when you say the 70s, between
1970s,
yeah.
The seat boards were actually shortened by 1 inch on each side. And when the seat boards were shortened from 12 inches to 10 inches, the movements now fit very nicely into these Merriman cases. Right. And so again, they were never marketed as a complete clock by Ives and Merriman, but there's no doubt that these cases are meant to go with each other. The cases, as we'll see, the cases are particularly deep in the top because you have to have that extra height to accommodate the torsion balance.
To have the balance in
yes.
situ, right? That's really, really fascinating. So the discovery of these clocks in the attic, so they were, sort of queued up for work, maybe many years earlier, and just left there.
That's right. It's my belief that these movements were originally in a tall clock case, mm-hmm. probably with a rectangular reverse glass painted dial. But after 30 plus years of having an interest in Ives, I can tell you that an original one of these movements in a tall clock case has never been discovered. But undoubtedly they were produced for those tall clocks, and the fact that they had run indicates to you that at some point they were housed in a case and were put in use.
So, I mean, looking at the back of the movement, there's no aperture cut out for the crutch piece to come through.
Nope.
So no evidence of any.
No.
And the escapement. I mean, the escapement is extraordinary. It's a
It's
pinwheel escapement on a
also
wooden clock.
also very unusual. This movement is by Ives. In the pinwheel escapement is also very unusual. This movement also has cut pinions, does not have roller pinions, and some researchers think that this may actually predate some of Ives' tall clock movement. So this may actually predate 1808. I think most scholars now, because we don't really know, we put 1810 to 1818 for these particular clocks. But yes, it has a pinwheel escapement, and it also has what is called a wobble wheel.
I was looking at the fly.
Yes,
it's so close to the bell, so it can't turn a full 360 degrees.
That's right.
How does that work?
So it actually, rather than rotating, it actually just flutters. And I think we can, let's see if we can, just like that.
I see. Incredible. And so rather than having a toothed wheel driving a pinion, it's got this sort of zigzag shape on the circumference of the wheel.
It's a wheel that is essentially scalloped along both edges on each side. Again, a very unusual movement, but it really, again, highlights the ingenuity and the creative genius of Joseph Ives. And this is another one of the reasons that collectors love to collect Joseph Ives clocks.
It's fascinating.
Yes.